Construction subcontracts, they are so critical. Matter of fact, all contracts are critical, but the ones in construction are super important. Regardless of where you are in the cycle, the owner to general contractor to sub, all across the chain, the contracts that you sign are the most important thing, or one of the most important things you can really strive to master, because mastering your contract and your contract language can not only protect you from disasters, but it lays the groundwork for you and the opportunities you have. This video is going to be all about construction contracts. My name is Scott Pieper. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Mobilization Funding, and today we're going to focus exactly on that. Let's get right into it. All right, construction contracts. Look, these are the foundation, all of the work you're going to do. It outlines the payment terms, it outlines terms in which you're going to work and operate, it outlines how you're going to handle problems, it outlines whose fault it is and what the ramifications of fault are. All of these things are super critical. However, at the end of the day, what everybody wants is to perform the project, do it the best you possibly can, and avoid problems. If someone has to reach back into the contract and start nitpicking language, obviously that's a big issue. But here's what's important to know. Up front, when you're negotiating, getting the right contract language specific to some critical items that are important for you is very beneficial if and when you do have an issue. But more importantly, it's beneficial to avoid those issues as well. So let's get into it. Payment terms are one of those things, okay? And contracts and cash flow are what we're going to focus on the most in this video. So how you outline your contract, the terms in which you have, will certainly impact your cash flow. Most importantly, do you agree to 30-day terms to be paid, 45-day terms, 60-day terms? Are you paid when paid? Are you paid if paid? Look, all of these things are very nuanced, but they're critical. Every single time that you sign a contract with certain payment terms, you're either going to increase your risk with those payment terms or you're decreasing your risk with those payment terms. Let's go through an example. You agree to a contract that when you do work and you invoice that work, that you're paid in 30 days. That's good. That's a baseline. If that's changed to 45 days, that increases the risk for you. If it's 60, increases the risk even further. If it's paid when paid, even further risk. Paid if paid, maximum risk to you. So if you have the same pricing structure for each one of those payment terms, then you're significantly hurting yourself and you're impairing yourself. You have to think about the risks associated to that. And if you want to do that work, maybe you have a great customer and maybe their terms are paid when paid, paid if paid, but you know from years of experience that working with them, you get the right contract, you do the work, you get paid on time, then you have a history there. But if you're starting out brand new with someone, or you're just starting out on a job and you've never worked with that person before, accepting those payment terms, paid when paid, paid if paid, is a significant risk to you, and you need to make sure you price that risk in. It's very difficult for you to manage a construction contract and a construction project from a cash flow perspective if you can't determine exactly when you're going to be paid, or within reason. So let's get into that. How can you avoid those problems? Well, the number one way to avoid those issues is to try to get the terms that you know you can operate with. Be upfront with that. Let the customer know that your performance capabilities are second to none. You're amazing at what you do. However, you're amazing at what you do as long as you can be paid within 30 to 45 days, if that's the case. Anything over 45 days, you should let your customer know that adds a lot of risk to your ability to perform. You can float your projects for that payment period of 30 to 45 days. But if it stretches past that, then you're going to be at risk, which is going to put the project at risk. Letting someone know that up front, there's nothing wrong with that. That puts everybody on notice. Probably help you get different payment terms. Now, maybe that general contractor won't pay you out of their own pocket, but you're definitely letting them know what your standard is and what your operational performance capabilities are within a certain standard. All of those are great things. Negotiating those payment terms to make sure that they fit what's best for you is certainly worth the effort, and being upfront and honest about that is definitely the best way to go. So let's talk about what that looks like and how you can determine it. Well, first and foremost, if you've watched my videos before, you know I'm going to talk about cash flow. And you also know I'm going to talk about cash flow tool, one in which we have on our website that you can use for free. It's under mobilization funding, under the resources tab, cash flow tool. I don't care if you use ours, but you have to use one of them. Find a cash flow tool that you can trust. Now, what is a cash flow tool for a project? Essentially, that cash flow tool is just going to help you determine how you spend your costs that you bid for that project. Think of it: labor, material, equipment, etc., miscellaneous expenses. How are you going to spend the costs on a project over the schedule that you're trying to keep? If you have $1 million job and $800,000 of cost, and it's going to take you 6 months on the schedule to finish the job, how do you spend the $800,000 over the 6 months? That's what the cash flow tool is going to tell you. Then what it's going to tell you is, how does the $1 million get paid to you month over month? Are you invoicing every 2 weeks, or are you invoicing once a month like normal construction? If you're invoicing like normal once a month and you have 30-day terms, then you know that that first payment's probably going to come somewhere around day 60 of the project if you start at the beginning of a month. If you start midway through the first month, then you're going to get your first money maybe 45 days out. 45 days into a project and you start to get some money from that same project, a pretty good scenario. It's not the ideal compared to other industries, but it's great for construction. It's pretty normal. If that 45-day period stretches to 60 because instead of 30-day terms, you have 45-day terms to be paid, well, then you're going to have to float 60 days worth of expenses. That's something you really want to know. And not only that, but based on what your terms are with your material suppliers or your subcontract labor or equipment or anything else that's going on in that project, when you have to order materials depending on certain lead times, it is absolutely necessary for you to make sure you know exactly what that cash flow is going to look like, and do you have the cash available to you? Whether it's operationally in the business already, whether it's on lines of credit, through other sources of credit you have, whether it's loans, equity, your own personal finances, who knows? But you have to make sure that that money is available. You need to know what amount it is. If you go into a project thinking that a couple $100,000, let's say $300,000 is enough money, and you actually turn out you need $500,000 before you can actually break even, that's $200,000. That's a mistake that you're going to have to figure out where it's going to come from. Knowing that proactively into the project before you get to that point where it's needed is critical. That's going to allow you to make great decisions. It's going to allow you to plan in advance. If all of a sudden you walk into that week and you have a $200,000 deficit, now you're going to be in a fight or flight mode. That's never a good time to make decisions, and it's certainly not going to be the best decision. That's how payment terms impact you. So payment terms impact you. No, of course, I'm not trying to be a genius here. We all know that. But how do those payment terms impact your cash flow? That's what you have to figure out. And you can't figure that out unless you do the cash flow for the project. And so use our tool, use someone's tool, use any tool. I don't care, as long as it gets you the information you need. Now, let's talk about change orders. And why are we going to talk about that? Well, they're inevitable in construction. They happen all the time. You have positive change orders, you have deductive change orders. I've done entire videos on change orders that we need to look at. If you want to know all about them, you can find them here in the same feed on our YouTube channel. But what I'm talking specifically about today is change orders as it relates to your contract, and change orders as it relates to your contract and how that impacts your cash flow of the project. So we just spent a few minutes talking about project cash flow, how the contract impacts that, the terms in your contract impact that. Now let's talk about the contract terms associated to change orders. Key important thing here. A change order, by definition, is any change in the scope of work, positively or negatively. That could be different materials. It could be an owner-directed change order. It could be material, time, labor, etc. There's many different ones. But at the end of the day, all of these different change orders are going to impact your cash flow on the project. Right out of the gate, very rarely does any change order not increase the cost of the project to you, the subcontractor. Let's assume that's the case here. Any change order that's going to be, or any change of work that you need to do that's not budgeted for or accounted for, is going to increase your cost. Depending on what the terms of the change orders are that you've negotiated in your contract, if you've negotiated them in your contract, you're going to have immediate cost outlays in either material or labor that you have to account for and pay for. If you have not put in your contract exactly how you're going to invoice when you're going to invoice, and the terms in which you need to be paid for change orders in your master contract before you started the work, you're already behind the eight ball. You're at a disadvantage. And you've also added more risk to yourself on this project because work needs to be done. And most subcontracts have a clause in there that you can't walk off the project. If you walk off the project, you're putting yourself even at more risk. So you don't have the ability to walk off the project, not that you want to, but if you also have to do more work, but you have no way of invoicing for that work or no other way to go back to that contract to say, here's my change order, here's how I'm going to invoice for it, here's my rates, etc. You have to sort of make that up as you go, which also means you have to negotiate that on the fly, which means you're negotiating that from a position that's not as strong as it could be. So you're negotiating candidly from a position of weakness and not strength. Why is that important? Well, at the beginning of the job, in the contract, you're awarded the job. Put in there a contract clause that just shows how you're going to invoice for change orders. Put what your rate you're going to invoice at. Those are all good things. What general contractor or owner wouldn't want to know what rate you're going to charge for a change order? If it's time and material, what's your markup going to be on the material? If it's labor, what's your labor rate? How are you going to count the hours? What's the charge for those things by square foot? It all depends on what your scope of work is, but you know how to account for a change order rates. Put it in your contract up front and then you can stick to it. It's one less thing you need to negotiate. It's hard enough to stick to the facts of, is this a change order or is this not a change order when you're on the fly in the middle of a project. The last thing you need to do is negotiate that and then negotiate what the rate is going to be. Get the pieces of the equation out early in the contract language so you don't have to negotiate rate or terms, just whether or not it's a change order. So that will help you significantly and help you de-risk your project and also help you perform better, keep a customer relationship better, and make everyone happy. Last, and this is important, retention. Retention sucks, okay? It'd be great if nobody held retention. Somewhere, somehow in this world, the industry is going to figure out how to eliminate retention and therefore give everybody a better chance to succeed. But in the meantime, here's what you need to know. Retainage and retention payments are something that you have to manage around. So let's just assume there's retention on the project. Let's assume you get paid the retention at the end of the job like normal. And let's assume you have not negotiated any different or special terms to that. That is going to be the least advantageous situation for you for the project. Why? Well, if someone holds back 5 or 10% of the contract value from you till you're done, finished, ultimately with the whole project, and even more so when the whole project is done, that puts you at a disadvantage because you're not going to have as much cash coming off that project to you for you to be able to use. So what does that do? Well, it means that you're going to have to use money from other places to help run the project. It means you're not going to break even. If you're getting less money off of the project, it's going to take you longer to make that project cash flow positive or sustaining itself than it would be if you got your retainage payments. And lastly, a lot of your profit is probably tied up in retainage. I mean, look, if the average subcontractor can invoice or can bid a project at a margin between 15 and 25%, well, then that means your retainage at 10% is going to be anywhere from 66 to as much as 50% sometimes. So your profit. So that means a lot of your profit's being held up in there, which means it's going to be harder for you to use any money off of that job to use for anything else in your business other than job-related costs, labor, material, etc. So here's what you need to know. When you're building that project cash flow, and I'm coming back to that project cash flow again, when you're building that project cash flow, you got to build it without the retainage. You got to assume that retainage isn't coming because it's not going to come in terms of cash flow along the way to help you. So here's what you got to do. Take the retainage off and then estimate out how you're going to receive those dollars. But contractually, there's things you can do. Maybe you can negotiate to receive your retainage when your scope of work is done instead of when the project's done. Maybe you can negotiate to receive your retainage 30 days after you're done and complete and off the project, 60 days off the project. That way you don't have to sit around until the very end when the last trade is off that job, things that you can't control. Perhaps you can invoice for retainage or 50% of your retainage or 25% of your retainage when you get to a certain milestone. Maybe when you've received 50% of the contract value, you're entitled to 50% of the retainage. Those are things that you can negotiate up front in your contract, and you should be, I'm encouraging you to, and you should be willing to do that. Anything that can de-risk the project for you. And candidly, let's be honest, you're asking for money that's already in your contract. You're asking for money that you've already earned. You shouldn't ask for money up front when you haven't earned the retainage yet. But if you've earned the retainage, then you should ask for it. It doesn't mean someone's going to give it to you, but if you don't even ask, then that's on you. So contractually, think about how you invoice for retainage. Think about the terms in which you put your retainage at, when you can invoice for it, and any milestone you can get to that allows you to get some of that retainage sooner than later is a positive thing. I encourage you to do that. And by having a cash flow tool and knowing what your cash flow is of the project, you can plan for that in the best possible way to maximize your success and avoid any confusion or stress for you. All right, in conclusion, we've talked about contracts. Mostly, specifically, we're talking about the contractual language that you sign prior to you winning a job, or after you won a job, the contractual language you're agreeing to. It's key. Knowing what those payment terms are, knowing what your retention payment terms are, knowing how you contractually are going to bid or invoice for change orders. All of those things impact your cash flow. So by nature, your contract and the terms you sign for when you get a job and a project are going to impact the cash flow of your project. We all know that cash flow in construction is one of the most difficult industries and things that we all manage through. So if your contract has a direct correlation to your cash flow, more importantly, the terms in your contract have a direct correlation to your cash flow, and you can control the terms that you agree to, then by nature, you need to pay attention to the terms in your contract, negotiate them, and make sure that they help you from a cash flow perspective. And that's not only good for you, but it's good for your customer, it's good for the project, it's good for the bank that's financing the project, because the better you are and the more equipped you are to perform, the more happy everyone else is going to be. So let's focus on that contract language. If you found this video to be helpful, please share it with people. Subscribe to our channel, help us out, share this information. Use our project cash flow tool. It's for free on our website, mobilizationfunding.com, resource page, cash flow tool. You can download it for free. If you like Excel, there's an instructional guide and the Excel file. If you don't like using Excel, you can tab through some questions that we've already put on there, and we'll create the Excel and email it to you. Thank you guys very much. God bless you, and have a great day.